to introducing our keynote tonight. Karen Johnson is a software test consultant. She's currently a senior QE manager at Salesforce. She's also a contributing author to the book Beautiful Testing. She focuses on this. Actually, this is the highlight I think I like that resonates most with me about Karen, is that she focuses on improving the people that she's working with to improve the quality of the products of the companies that she's working at. So without further ado, let's welcome Karen Johnson.
Hello, can you hear me now? Okay. Hi. Okay. Is this on too? Okay, all right. I had this fear that I was going to get up and speak and it was going to sound like a cat scratching, right, with like two mics going at the same time. So I am here today. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. Thanks for being here. It's the last session of the day. I know you could skinny out, get home. I get it. So thanks for being here. And thanks also to KWSQA for having me here. Awesome to be here. It's been really nice being up here. What to speak on, right? That's always a thing when you get invited to speak somewhere. What should I talk about? So I've been thinking about, well, what do I mostly do? And I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but I mostly feel like I'm surrounded by problems, all the time, everywhere. And people seem to expect that that's what I'm going to deal with, right? So it didn't always start out that way. I was a tester, and then I was a test lead, and then I was a test manager, and then I got really steeped in office politics because I was a test manager. So then I quit my job because at that point I was divorced and had a small child, and that's what all single mothers do. They quit their jobs, right? And said, okay, I'll open up my own business and I will work as a software consultant and I'll be able to manage the work that I get, right? Choose the projects that I want to be on. So that's how I worked it. I worked as a software tester on different projects and was really hoping it would give me massive variety, which I'd already had quite a bit of. And it did. It gave me a lot of variety. It was terribly fun. It was actually really cool. And I had the opportunity to say to people sometimes, you know, I know you want to hire me for that, but it's just not the right thing. And I shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't hire me for that. So let me refer a colleague or something. And every now and then I'd end up in a situation and I'd be like, this isn't right. And I would walk up to a client and be like, this isn't right, right? So I've kind of learned how to be pretty honest about what's going on and whether it's really right and whether I'm in the right place. Because I actually like to be useful. And Keith said something this morning about providing value. And I've got this thing in me, because I worked as a solo consultant for about 9 years, where I feel almost on an hourly basis, I have to be providing value. And when I'm not, I start to sort of sweat, because I get very anxious. Because what happens as a consultant, at least for me and my little business, if I'm not providing value, then I shouldn't really be there. You shouldn't really be paying me, and I should leave, right? So I have to figure that out. And what I did, and I realized I didn't really tell a lot of people this, but people do ask, and it seems like it helps people, so I share it. What I did was over time I started to look for more and more challenging contracts. And instead of necessarily testing, I went from being hired by managers to usually VPs. And the conversation usually goes like this. Usually somebody who knows me, they've done some work with me, refers me somewhere. And I don't know what the deal is. And they'll be like, it's up to you now. Conversation's been set up. It's up to you. Usually a VP will say to me, we have a quality problem. But I don't know what it is, because that's not my thing. But that's your thing. That's what you do. And so I would like you to come in and figure out what the problems are, and then give me ideas around what we should do to fix things. And you may or may not be the solution. You might come to me and say, we need more agile training, we might need to hire other people, we might have a problem with an offshore vendor. Who knows what it could be? Find it, is what I usually hear. And I'll check back with you in a few weeks. Those are my favorite assignments. That's the way I like to be hired. If you have an opportunity to tell somebody how you like to be hired, you should know that, right? At some point in your professional life, you should know what's right for you and under what conditions you like to be hired. That's how I like to be hired. So It's challenging, right? It's really fun. What I basically did was I elevated what I was working on over a long stretch of time. So I look back to some of my first assignments, as a tester sort of hiding in a cubicle, checking off boxes sometimes, to some of the things that I do now, and I'm blown away by it. But you won't see that in the title because for a long time I've just said I'm a consultant. And then for about the last 2 years, year and a half, I've been working as an employee, with some assorted mixed reactions to that, which are probably on a live webcast better left that way, right? So now I have clients who can tune out and relax because I'm not going to talk about things that I shouldn't be talking about because that gets complicated. Instead, I'd rather talk about solving problems. And I could do one of those poll things like, who in here has a problem? Except I figured with a title like this, I probably need to do a poll thing. And I'm not making fun of polls. Don't get me wrong. I do it, right? And sometimes as a speaker, you're trying to do anything you can to make sure people are still awake and engaged, right? Like, show of hands, right? You're awake, yes. Okay, but I'm going to make a guess that everyone here has problems. Personal problems, work problems, some annoying situation going on at work that frankly, and you don't want to tell the coworker you're sitting next to, you don't really know what to do. You just don't know what to do. It gets under your skin at night, you complain to your family about it, and he'll never really understand it quite the same. You morph the people that you work with during the day to like characters that just, belong on TV. And they don't really know how to advise you. And you go back to work and it's the next day again, and there you are dealing with these problems that just seem like they ferment overnight and you don't really know what to do. And sometimes some problems just seem bigger than you, like just bigger than you. And so for me, being honest, 5'2", lots of things are bigger than me, right? And some problems are bigger than me. And sometimes I go for long walks and I ask myself all sorts of questions like, well, what do I think I can do? And how do I think I am going to solve that? And what would so-and-so do? And I try to envision situations and solutions. And so it occurred to me that the most practical thing to talk about is solving problems because that's what I feel like I do. And frankly, at this point in my career, that's what I think I should be doing. Like that's what actually feels right. I should be solving problems for people, right? That's what I do. So I have one of those slides that's a little bit about me, right? So I've written a lot of articles. I was a journalism major, and so I enjoy writing. Yes, I wrote a chapter in the book, Beautiful Testing. I feel good mentioning that book because I don't make any money on sales for that. Anybody who wrote for that donated to charity up front. So any profits for that, I don't get any of those, but there are people who benefit from it. I teach software testing. I speak at conferences internationally and domestically. I like Twitter. I don't like fighting in Twitter. I don't like being inaccurately quoted in Twitter. So, because that's annoying. That's really annoying. So I did something this afternoon. My tweets should be going out while I'm speaking. And if you like my tweets, you can just retweet them. And since at some point I know I'm going to start mentioning books, because that's just kind of the way I am, all the books that I mentioned should go out as tweets with links to Amazon. So you don't have to send me an email later saying, what was that book you mentioned? Whatever, you'll find it. It's there. Relax. I'm supposed to be working now. You're supposed to be relaxing. So that's the way that goes. But here's the next thing, and I think this is really important, but I just don't think we do it, and I don't think we have a format to do this. In my mind, and you can ask yourself if you agree with me, because you might just think I'm totally crazy and you don't agree with me. When a speaker gets up and speaks, do you ask yourself, why are they qualified to speak on this? Right? Wouldn't you love to ask them? Like, why am I listening to you? Who are you? Do I even care what you've got to say? But we don't. What happens is people get up to speak and we kind of give them credit out of the box. We assume the conference people vetted it out and that for some reason they're qualified to speak on this. But what happens when you get a title like solving problems? What am I, the expert problem solver? Probably not, right? Probably not. So why should you listen to me? Well, that's a really good question. What am I going to give you for an answer for that? Because I worked as a consultant for a number of years and people pay me to solve their problems. So at least I'm a paid professional on doing this. But you still might not like my opinions. And I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if some speakers know this. Some do, some don't. sometimes when you speak, you have a goal. Some people get up and like their whole goal is to get people really pumped up. They're really good at motivating people. We have some of those people in our field. You probably know them. They're larger than life, and we love them for that, and they're fun to listen to. Here's what I want. Here's my goal today. I would like you throughout this whole talk to ask yourself, I don't know, does that work for me? Ask yourself that. Like, be a skeptic. Like Keith said, be a skeptic. You get paid to be a skeptic. So be a skeptic of this. So my goal is that I leave you with some things to think about. My goal is that the next time you have a problem to solve, which could be as soon as tonight, right? That maybe you'll pick up something, one or two things that kind of help you with that. But only you can really figure out whether any of this is helpful or not. And be that skeptic. Okay? All right, so here we go. Do you ever feel like this during the day? And I don't know if people on a webcast can see it, but it's a young woman looking massively depressed at her desk. And, you know, somebody lobs you a problem, and there you are with it. Well, I go through that too. And I've started to realize that one of the reasons things feel bigger than me, or I can feel really stuck, is that we don't always actually know what the problem is. We think we do, but sometimes we kind of abbreviate it in our heads. Like, oh, this project manager is just such a pain. You know, and so then we think the problem is this person. And we get focused on that. And, you know, not surprisingly, everything else that person does, we tend to find very annoying. And we're not really looking at what some of the other parts of the problem are. Because problems can be really complex, right? They're really complex. When you deal with people and you deal with events, and I kind of think of meetings as events, and stuff that happens and the politics that happen, things can change at a very rapid rate. I don't know if anyone's ever been in a meeting that from the start of the meeting, it was seeming okay, to the end of the meeting, something went really south. And sometimes you don't even know what got said, how it happened. All of a sudden, you're just not in good shoes anymore, and you don't even know how to fix it. It went faster than you could figure it out. Or you just, at the moment, couldn't think of the right thing to say until you were driving home that night. And by then, like, the moment had passed. Right. So I think what happens with a lot of problems is they're hard to solve because not that they're bigger than us, but they're contained with more things inside of it. You know what it's like? Whoever gets to say this when they're talking. It's like a big, nasty, giant hairball. And unless you unravel some of it and figure out what the parts of the problem are and address it that way, you'll still probably have a big, nasty problem. Have you ever had a situation where you think you have this problem at work, you go to fix it, right? So let's make up a problem. Let's imagine that you're working somewhere that really loves metrics, and they want to measure testing, right? This is always something I have a reaction to, right? Just disturbs me, right? Like, it's a disturbing, I think because testing is not really a mathematical quantifiable thing, right? And so we're trying to do the wrong thing to it. But imagine you're working somewhere and it's very metric-centric. They love their metrics. There's dashboards. Everybody does dashboards and pie charts and all this. And imagine that somewhere along the way, things are shifting in the office and that you're trying to explain testing. But here you are. You never complained about it in the beginning. Unlike Keith, you just kind of sucked it up and you did a dashboard like they asked you to. And now you've got them all trained that they read pie charts or something, some other kind of metrics. And now you're in some meeting where kind of the pressure's on, right? And you're trying to explain something about testing, and they're used to looking at this pie chart. So here's part of the problem. What do? Do you tell them that you've been BSing them the whole time and that talking about testing by numbers is a really stupid way to talk about testing? Because the number of test cases really doesn't matter. For that matter, the number of bugs really doesn't matter either. Right? How customer support might be handling life could matter more, but people don't tend to talk to testers about that. So what do? Now you're stuck. You can't do anything. So see, there's multiple problems that are actually going on here. One is that you're dealing with culture. So you've got people who are used to it. Two, unbeknownst to you, and whether you wanted to or not, you got them trained to it. So you fed into it, and now you're kind of stuck. And so now to unstick, if there is such a way to refer to it, you'd have to almost say, you know, all the stuff I've been telling you is actually not true. And then usually somewhere along the way, there's somebody in a group. So if you're in a place where the culture is metrics, somebody loves those metrics. And at least multiple other people either agreeing with that person or actually feel the same way. So maybe it's your CTO. Your CTO loves metrics. What are you going to do with that? And maybe you have Scrum Masters who've been feeding into it, right? Okay, we've gone from a Gantt chart to velocity, and I'm still feeding you metrics. And guess what? They meet when you're sometimes not in the meeting. So you're never really even in a session where you can say, you know what, can we just peel it back and look at this metrics thing? It's gotten out of control. You're not really in a situation like that, so how are you going to deal with it? You can deal with it by suddenly refusing to do metrics, and you might even get somebody like maybe your VP becomes your advocate. Like, yeah, you know what, metrics for testing is not the only way to look at it. But you still haven't dealt with the problem that the CTO still feels that way and believes that way. And so now there's just a disconnect. So see that giant hairball thing? You fixed part of it. So part of the drain is open, but part of the drain has some nasty stuff still going on. And until you deal with all of the parts of it, you're going to be left with some of the problem. And that's why problems sometimes undo. You know, like you feel like you fixed it, but it undoes itself, right? Or it doesn't all the way resolve because there's parts of the hairball that you haven't dealt with. There is a wonderful book. Oh my gosh, here she goes. And there's 3 people over here laughing because I told them yesterday some of the things speakers do, and I'm doing some of them. And they know this. And I also warned them like book references are going to come up. This is why I set them up on Twitter. Wonderful book. It gets probably dismissed because of its title called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. How awesome is that, right? So it was written by a guy, I don't know him, I wish I could meet him. He sounds awesome. He was an artist who worked for Hallmark. So imagine an artist working for Hallmark. What is that? That's a big company. Bet they got a lot of hairballs. Bet he didn't want to deal with that stuff. And so the way he figured it out was he figured out a way to work at a place that was big, Hallmark, right? So he had the kind of that weird job security thing, maybe. And he figured out a way to work around the hairball. So he was independent enough to do his stuff. So Orbiting the Giant Hairball actually makes sense. It's actually a brilliant title. It's an adorable book. I highly recommend it. And that's what we have to do sometimes. Sometimes we have to orbit the hairball. But sometimes you got to go in the hairball and you got to like deal with the parts of it. And so that's something that I want to talk about. And this is part of like the nastiest problems that I've dealt with that I can't fix with, oh, well, tomorrow I'm going to teach this team how to do exploratory testing, right? Like some of those simple missiles that I can send off and do, they don't fix some of the problems. So what I like to do is spend more time with the team to try to figure out like what are the other problems. Because what happens is there's a quality problem, right? So I might get hired to come in and teach exploratory testing because those testers don't have it right. And if we could get them smoothed out, everything else will be fine. We'll have quality. So what happens is I'll get on a team and I'll realize like all sorts of other weird stuff's going on. Developers don't like unit tests. It slows them down. It's like not into them. And the stories are terrible. Like they're non-testable placeholder cards, basically, right? With like one line. And or sometimes the stories, they're really almost funny, right? Because they start out with things like, as a developer, I want error logging going on. Like what? Like what? And you see these stories, right? And then I'll go to meetings where they'll be talking about some of these things. This drives me nuts, by the way. I'm just telling you a pet peeve now. Where I'll sit with testers on a team who don't talk in product envisioning. They just sit there and let the conversations about new features come and go. All right, so you have really crappy stories that are not well written, and you're in the meeting where they're talking about the stories, and you're silent. Okay, so my sympathy for you has now been reduced because you had a moment to help yourself and you didn't do anything with it. This problem bothered me so much. I actually wrote an article on this. How a tester can help during product envisioning is what it's called. So you can look that up. Because you have a moment, and you can't always afford to lose the moments. because they pass on you, and by the end of the week, things have changed. And then all of a sudden, you end up in some meeting where someone says, well, the testers were in the meeting, so they're okay with it. You weren't really okay with it, right? But maybe for some reason, it was really awkward to talk, because it's hard. Why is it hard? I don't know. Part of why I went into software testing, I've never told anyone this. I always end up doing things like this, and it's like recorded, was because I was a really, really shy kid in school. And so not talking to people for me was a wonderful thing. One of my first jobs, the only cubicle left was the one way at the end of the hall, and I was in heaven. I was like, yes, nobody will be talking to me unless they really mean to. They're not going to drop by or anything. I'm in the back. And I was very happy for a long time. And then I got over being shy, and now I can't sit in the back anymore. And that doesn't work for me as much as it used to actually work for me. But I've learned a few other things along the way, and that is if you want to really solve a problem and to deal with the real hairball, you have to break down into small, weird, tactical things that you need to do. And this is where I really kind of want to focus, because this is where the stuff happens. So mentioned already earlier today, it's like, oh, just another thing you have to do as a speaker. You have to mention James Bach if you're at a testing conference, because that proves you've been around for a while. Okay, right. Am I checking them off the list? There's a quote coming. Relax. It's okay. I got the book reference. We're working on it. Okay. So James Bach mentioned this thing that I really love called MIP it. Mention it in passing. So a lot of times I have things I want to say, but there's not like some meeting where like Karen gets to say all the things that she's really feeling, right? And I don't always get invited in like the right group of people to bring up something I want to say, but gosh, like if I could just say this certain thing to a couple of people, you know, maybe once or twice or a few times, and it will start to stick, it would really help. So I really took to heart when James mentioned this MIP it idea, because that's what it is. It's like there's stuff I really want to say, and it matters, but I don't want it in another email. I don't want it misquoted. I don't want it passed around. I don't want it. What did we learn earlier today? BCC and CC. Like, I want to be careful. I want to say it. I want to say it myself. So I use the MIPITs, right? I have those moments, but I can only even grab those moments if I'm ready for them. So I'll tell you another secret, because I used to do this. I used to get so nervous talking to people, and sometimes I'd have things I really, really wanted to say. This is part of how I got over being shy. I used to take Post-its, and I'd have like a little tag list of things I wanted to say to somebody, and I'd like sneak it in my little pants pocket, right? And then I'd run into the person. I'll pick on you because you can handle it. I'd run into the person and I'd be like, oh, hey, you know, and I'd remember because I wrote down some things on this Post-it. I'd remember what I wanted to say, and I'd mention it. And every now and then we'd end up in a situation, maybe it's an elevator or there was like a moment of like disconnect in the conversation. I would literally pull out like my little Post-its and peek and be like, oh yeah, there was this other thing I wanted to talk to you about. You know, we're talking about not really using metrics for testing anymore. And I know that's probably going to make you really uncomfortable, but I was wondering if you can come to a session later this week so I can explain to you like better ways that we can look at what's been going on with testing. Because I know that that's probably concerning you too. Like you're fitting it in, right? You're lobbing it in because big meetings are hard. Sometimes it's the wrong group of people. Sometimes you miss the moment. Sometimes you just get all tongue-tied. But those one-offs with people, you could probably manage those better. So if you're really not good at a big crowd, find those one-offs. And then think about this like notebook, right? Here's something I encourage people. I do this all the time. I still do this. I own what is called big newsprint paper. And I pull it off. I don't do this on site. Right, I have to be remote. I do it in hotel rooms all the time. I bring big paper with me and I lay it out, and I will identify. I need to talk to this person. I need to follow up on that email. I need to do this, and I break it down into really small things that I need to do. I don't want people seeing those notes. They're private. That's my business. That's my agenda. But I'm working my problems, and that's how I'm working them. It's not just the big things that I do. It's not just the moment of all being together and doing a presentation, constantly chipping away at it, right? Don't wait for the perfect day. They don't happen. They just don't. They don't happen. You have to find the moments and squeeze them in. So if you really want to plan at solving a problem, it's probably got to look like this. It's going to look gnarly because, again, you're up against a hairball. So you shouldn't be expecting a pretty looking plan anyway, right? It's got to be a little bit gnarly. And I'll bet you somewhere in there, there's at least one person you're very uncomfortable talking to, right? And some conversation that you think is going to be hard. So we know there's books for this, right? Here we go again. Influencer is a wonderful book. I'll probably mention that again. Difficult Conversations, not just for talking to a spouse about things that drive you nuts at home, right? These are books that can help you. I mean, the software testing field is filled with, if you know your Myers-Briggs, INTJs. So we're not really good at all that extrovert stuff. We have to do the double time on fixing that. Here you go. Ready? I taught you yesterday. There's a quote. There's a quote because I couldn't say this better. There's always a people problem. When I first saw this, I thought, that's really negative. Like, that's just so negative. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, it's Jerry Weinberg. He's totally brilliant. If you don't know who he is, he's only written about 37 books. He's been around forever. If you have any way you can humanly find a way to stand somewhere in a room with him, you should do it. Okay? I literally was in a room with him for the first time, and I'm thinking, what's the magic about Jerry? Like, what's the deal with that, right? I don't really know. And I happened to be going through a horrible personal time. And this guy literally came up to me, put his hand on my back, and went, I don't know what you're up against, but, you know, hang in there. I was like, what? Who is this guy? He's amazing. He's just amazing. His books are amazing. If you only read one book, and I know people don't read anymore, I get that, read The Secrets of Consulting. Just look at the little bits of it of like what's in your toolkit. It's a wonderful part. I just consolidated hours worth of reading for you. I would do that. But that's the thing, right? There's probably a people problem somewhere in your hairball. There's probably a couple of them. Some of the hardest ones are actually not the people that you don't like talking to. You can actually get over that. I think I'm over that. I'm pretty sure I'm over that one. It's when there's conversations going on between multiple people and you're never part of it. So it's the VP who gets along really well with the CTO and they chat at times that you're not in the room. And they have their own opinions about maybe what's going on in testing. And so you're not even there to diffuse it, argue it, defend it, or anything else. You're not even part of the conversation. And for some reason, one person has a massive amount of influence over the other person. And you, maybe not so much. So that is harder to deal with than finally walking up to somebody and saying, you know, I have a disconnect with you and I need to talk to you, right? Can we hammer through this a little bit together? That is much harder to deal with. And if you thought that was a problem, check this out. Yeah, I thought it was everybody else. Turns out I'm part of the everybody else. Now what? Did you ever realize this? Did you ever realize you're part of the problem? I'm absolutely convinced that if you're working somewhere and it's messy and sticky and things are not good and you haven't worked to solve it, you are part of the problem. So if there is somebody who's listening to me right now, you know exactly what we're both talking about, right? Because I didn't want to become part of a problem, so I had to start speaking up about things that were massively uncomfortable to people that I really didn't know, which was really hard. Because I knew that I would have to consider myself part of the problem if I didn't fess up and start talking about the hard stuff. So what do you do when you think that maybe you're part of the problem? Probably not too bad. If you think you're part of the problem, that's probably not too bad. The worst part is when you never think you're part of the problem, everyone else is the problem. So I've been working on, personally, I've been working on this little shortcut, and I say this to myself. Whenever I want somebody else to change, you know the problem there, right? Anyone married? Right? You know the problem there. Whenever you want somebody else to change, ask yourself what you can change about you. Because chances are you're not going to change them. At best, you can influence them. Maybe the better thing you can do is how you react to that person. Maybe for some reason you're not a great combination. So maybe you have to look at, like, what am I going to do in this deal? Right? And I've worked with a few people over the years, right? We all have. Like, if you've been working long enough, please, You've worked with a few that you just really wish you hadn't, or didn't ever have to again. Same for me, right? But my bar for that is getting higher all the time. It's amazing, right? And part of it is by being able to talk about the really hard things, because really bad problems do not repair themselves. They just get worse. And so part of it is being able to have some really hard conversations. And as it turns out, like I said, when you get involved with other people, and I think I quoted this on Twitter, the dynamics between people, even though it's invisible, it's palpable, right? Certain combinations of people get weird. It may be a little sticky with one person, but some combination of people sometimes is just particularly bad. And there you are, and you've got to deal with it. I've got to bring this up, and that is time. And I'm going to say a bunch of conflicting things, so I'm warning you now. This is where you're going to have to be like, I don't know, I got to think about this. I don't know what she's talking about. On the one hand, doing nothing is not great because time passes. I remember one really politically charged situation I was in some years ago. And from the start of the week, where things were not great, but like okay, and you could feel the winds, right? Like not great, to the end of the week where it was like living hell, a lot had happened. And I must have missed opportunities throughout the week to kind of self-correct some things that were going on, or to make some conversations that needed to be had. It just got worse. So doing nothing is actually doing something. It's just hard. It's hard to figure out what that timing is, you know? I watch it now. I watch it in meetings all the time, right? Better facilitators, better scrum masters, better, people a little bit more tuned in will come out with statements like, well, I'm assuming silence is consent, right? To try to provoke people to like speak it up, right? Or here we go, this is what we've got. But now you got to balance that against this, right? Which is a picture of somebody who's also kind of freaking out. So how do you figure out doing nothing is bad versus this is really not the moment for me to speak because I'm really torqued. And if I talk now, I'm probably really going to say something I shouldn't say, or I'm going to make it worse. How do you balance that? See the trick of the thing? And this is where expertise comes in, and this is where years of experience come in. And this is where you can't school some things to people straight away. And it's not because some of the elders don't want to teach other people, it's because it just takes time. And then you've got this weird variable called people. And so what you could do with one person is not what you can do with somebody else. I know people both personally and professionally that if I say it wrong, I'm going to make it worse. And I got to get it right. I don't speak perfectly all the time. Yeah, no. Very hard to do. And in the heat of the moment, the more upset I am about something, the more attached I am to something, you can just feel it. It's going to get harder. And then there are some people who, they know that, right? And they're enjoying it. And then I have one of those faces, like I told Keith, I don't play poker with anyone. Because you can read a lot and I know it, right? And that's a disadvantage to me in the corporate world. And I know that too. So you got to balance this. And you're going to be like, she's giving me conflicting advice, and how do I know? One of the best things you can get to know is know yourself. Know when you think you can speak and know when you need to walk away, right? It is an article I read ages ago, something about when you get really angry, angry is a good thing. Because angry tells you that somebody has crossed a border. They've crossed some boundary, and you've got something that you've got to deal with. The question will be sometimes whether you'll deal with it or not. So here's something that I think is really important, especially in corporate America, which is software testers. We often don't talk that way. We don't talk about working in corporate America. We talk about, I'm in IT, or I work in the computer group, or something else. But we don't use the words corporate America too much. But you know what? We're in corporate America. Actually, I'm in Canada, so clearly not here. But well, you get my point. Even internationally, you get my point, right? Because some things are kind of the same everywhere. So you cannot do it alone. Like, don't be a one-man show, because it won't work well that way. It just won't. You need allies. I used to say you need allies if for nothing else that when you go on vacation, An ally is somebody who will email you even on vacation and tell you something is tilting and you need to know about it. If you don't have any allies, that's when you walk back into work from a vacation and you're sweating about it, right? Because you don't know enough of what's gone on. Probably not a good sign. Here's something else that I learned, but it just took me years. It saved me so much time. Somebody told me this. Sometimes your allies can do more than you can do. So you know how there's a limit to what you can do? That is true. There are limits to what you can do, and you hate some of those limits, but they're there anyway. Your allies may have different limits. So when you have allies, they can get you further distance. And one of the best ways to have allies, pay it back. Pay it back. Pay it back before you need it back, right? Pay it back. Some of the saddest things I ever see are people who, hi, my name is so-and-so. I've been working at the same company for 20 years. I really love this place, and now they're laying me off. Now I want to network. Now I think I need a website, and I don't have a LinkedIn profile. Can you help me find a job? What have you been doing? What are you thinking? Be thinking that way all the time. You're a skeptic. You're supposed to be a skeptic. You're a tester. You don't trust anything without proof. And why should you trust something like your whole career to chance? Do you really, I'm sorry, take the company name out, but you really think there's a company, unless you own it, you think you can trust? Take care of yourself. Oxygen mask first, right? Take care of yourself out there, right? So, don't go it alone. I have a whole thing about enlisting allies, and I'm not going to go off on this. I did this a long time ago for a conference in Portland, Oregon. Wonderful people, KWSQA. And I did a whole invited speaker talk on building alliances. And they don't show me, which is really awesome, because I hate watching myself in video. It's just awful to watch. So all you can hear is the voice, which means you could probably play it at work and like earbud it and listen to it. It's still out there as a recording on how to build alliances, right? And I recommend that because you need them. Now here we go. Here's more of the balancing act. You also have to step away. Shocking how often I solve a problem on a walk. Okay, first of all, I walk a lot, so there's that. But I often will solve problems walking. I'll share not the insides of a personal problem, but I had a personal problem recently that was really thorny, and I just couldn't figure it out. I don't actually have it all figured out now either. But I was walking along, and I asked myself, I'm going to see if I can say this without like crying, because being recorded, that would really be bad, right? But I asked myself, because I was just stumped. I was like, I don't know what to do on this. And I thought, oh, this is lovely. I'm giving a keynote on solving problems. And I'm like walking around talking to myself with a problem that I don't know how to solve. Like, what kind of expert am I? And so I asked myself, like, what would my dad do on this one problem, right? Because it just seemed like stuff he's had to deal with, something he would have figured out. I hate that I can't call him now and ask him that. So I got like kind of analyzing it deep. And there was a problem that he had to solve that was really tough. And I remember what he did. So I broke it down, and I was like, he did stuff. I was like, so what did he actually really do? He hired experts. He did. Yeah, I remember that. He hired experts, and he trusted them. Not blindly and not mindlessly, but he did trust them. And he put a lot of energy behind what they were recommending. And man, he was massively faithful. He got up day after day under a condition that was just difficult. I better stop. I'm going to like get all teary now. And he just kept going. He put a lot of energy in it. He put a lot of trust in it. And he put what he could behind it. And I thought, he had a plan. I need a plan. That's what I need. I need a plan because I don't have one. I'm swinging at this thing and I don't have a plan. And he came up with a plan. It seemed thin. It seemed so thin to me. It didn't seem like he had a plan. But he did. He had a plan. He hired experts. He talked to multiple people. He knew who he was going to trust for this problem. He gave all the support behind it that he could. He enlisted allies. I was one of them. Dang, man, he's good, right? And he chipped away at it. And I was like, I got it. So it was a really good walk because I was like, I got it. I got my solution. I know what I'm going to do. I know who I need to talk to now. So trust her instincts. All the way around, trust them. And the more you trust them and you act in them, the more they're going to grow. And the more they grow, the more you're going to trust them. It's this really nice circle that happens. And no one else even needs to know what some of them are. Sometimes you just trust the moment that you can do certain things. Sometimes you have to trust a person. Trust those things, right? Look for them and trust them. But before I get all like fairy on you, like, oh, it's all perfect, and you come up with a framework, and this nasty hairball is just dissipating, there's a reality check. And it is that, like, know when to fold them kind of thing, right? So I'll be honest, I'm working with a really difficult problem right now. And you know what? It's bigger than me. And you know what? I've done everything I can. And I can sleep at night now because I've done everything I can. And you know what? I can't fix it. Just can't figure that out. Relief to some people who probably know me and possibly are watching this, right? So sometimes you have to walk away from some things. They're just not yours to solve. It's not your moment to solve them. It's not your situation to solve, right? I don't like to be a quitter, so I like to go after it hammer and fist. But by the same token, you really should get a handle on figuring out like what you can do. You know, push the bar, sure, totally push the bar, but you have to do it gradually. And I think back to it, I don't want to say how many years ago I was in that back cubicle. And that company's long since imploded and gone. But what I can do now is not the same as what I could do then. And that just keeps changing. And you watch and you see it change. Lately, I've been doing stuff that I never used to do, and I doodle more now. And if you're like me, and you're really not artistic, like really not artistic, there's some things I can recommend. So there's some books out there. Doodle Revolution is one of them. Back of the Napkin is one of them. Game Storming is actually one of them. Sketch Notes is one. And I think these are all like hopefully going off on Twitter or about to. Getting better at doodling to see if I can unlock some things. And I want to share something with you. This is buried in a book. And it's so sad. When a book gets written and it's not like within the last 3 years, it just disappears into the vapor of like, it's old and it doesn't get looked at anymore. There's a woman, her name is Annette Simmons. I haven't met her. I'd like to. She's a storyteller. So if you know me, you can see why I'd want to meet her, right? I love telling stories. But she wrote a book a long time ago called Territorial Games. And one of the things she talks about is office politics. And one of the exercises she does in it is she says, pull out a piece of paper and draw where you are in your whole situation at work. And I love doing this exercise, right? Because nobody's going to see this. This is newsprint paper stuff that I don't share with anyone. And I did this. First time I was reading the book, I like stopped and I like drew a picture. And a horrible picture. Like I have to explain everything of what it is because it just looks like whatever. But there it was. All of a sudden it dawned on me. I was alone on a raft in this picture. And there was a big divide. I think I tried to draw it like a river or something where it was like all the developers were over there and they were kind of in a pool almost of safety because they generally and often are out of the politics of things. They're just kind of, they go in their cave, they do their thing. And there I was alone. And when I drew this little doodle, I realized I'm really alone. Like I have no allies at this place and there's no one I trust. Like there isn't even anyone I would want as an ally, right? So that was the place I quit because that's, right, recognition of like the dead end and where we are. I don't think I would have realized some things without the picture. So even if you really can't draw, nobody has to see it, consider doodling it. And it goes back to, I don't know if I dare flip this many slides. See, there we go. It's this. It's part of your plan, right? It's part of coming up with your tactical plan. It may be that you doodle some. And by doodling, maybe you're not drawing like, those little cube things, because that's like the only thing I can draw in like kind of a flower and sort of a star. But other things that help you to actually unlock what's going on and give you some ideas about what you might do to fix things. Consider it. And then here's a big one. I think we have to recalibrate, right? So you have to recalibrate. Those MIPITs, if they were good, might have changed things. Those opportunities for conversations might have shifted things. What you had in your plan in the beginning may change later. This is why for some of us, old enough to remember when we used to write a test strategy, and I used to actually teach a class in test strategy, because we had these giant releases, and so we were planning for months at a time. Now we plan totally on the seat of our pants, back of the napkin, whatever you want to call it. It's only 2 weeks. Everything changes after that. 3 months, it's sort of a long plan. 5 years is like, that is a bizarre thing. Somebody laugh. 5 years is like a bizarre thing to even think about. It's like ridiculous. I found out somebody recently asked somebody on an interview, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I said, really? You asked somebody, how could you possibly ask somebody that? It is a ridiculous question. In our field, that is way too far out there. Can't do that. But you do have to recalibrate. You do, because stuff shifts, right? I didn't say that other word. I said shifts, okay? Stuff shifts, and so you have to recalibrate your plans. And if you don't, now you're the one missing the boat, right? All right, so that's been a lot of theory, but let's talk through a problem, right? Because it would be nice to actually have one. Let's imagine, this is probably a little too close for home, but there'll be no names, I promise. Let's imagine we're in a situation, and I saw somebody put this on Twitter, it's bloody brilliant. Alan Richardson, I think, the evil tester over in the UK did this. He called it the test automation unicorn. I read it, I was like, of course it's Alan. He's bloody brilliant, right? So imagine you're in a situation where your boss believes we have to get to 100% automation. Of course, under the covers, most testers think, what is going to happen to my job? My job's going to be gone. And it's so foolish of people to not realize that part of the emotion in the room is going to be people are going to be afraid they're going to lose their job. So why don't you just talk about that? Maybe you're going to repurpose them, or maybe they will. Maybe some of them will be gone. All right, put the elephant in the room, right? Instead of ignoring it. Anyways, they don't tend to do that. So what do you do if you end up in a situation where they believe 100% automation is the goal? Like that's the mecca, that's what we're striving towards. And what do? And then you've got this other part of the problem where you've got maybe at least one dev manager who is really not keen on manual testing, just doesn't like it. Just not a fan, doesn't kind of respect the testers, doesn't know a thing about testing. And by the way, I've noticed a correlation here. It's an obvious correlation. People who don't know much about testing almost always want to get to 100% testing. Right? It's people who don't like testing because it's a weird thing that takes up time that's at the end of the schedule. Albert talked about this, right? Like testing is at the end of the schedule. We're so inconvenient. We mess up schedules. So what do? Automate it. Awesome. We can just speed the whole thing up. So how do you tackle a problem like that? Right? I've watched some people tackle this problem. This is a big thing going on in the world, and for some of us, we've seen it before, and it's back again. Right? You don't want to be the one in the office being tagged as, you know what it's called? The anti-automation person? Oh, they're against automation. Oh, they're a manual tester. So they don't like automation. Now you seem like you're anti against the whole forward-thinking approach. And you end up what? In a really bad seat. Right? And then people don't want to associate with you because now like there's a bad vibe around you in the office and not a lot you can do about it. So you got to work the problem in a different way. You've got to work it in a different way, right? You either got to suck it up and you have to act like it's our goal. We're going to go to 100% automation. Dumbest thing I ever heard of. But since we'll never accomplish it, we'll all say we're on that bus, and someday when we get to, maybe even 60%, we'll re-deal with that problem, right? But maybe you want to be more upfront about it. So maybe what you want to do is talk to some of the powers that be. And that really varies. It's shocking how much that varies. In some places, developers can have massive influence, and it's that one person. And you may not be able to convince them. They've just got an incredible, they've got the ear of the CTO, and for some reason, maybe they're longtime friends, or you don't know, you'll never know. You just can't kind of crack that. Or in other situations, maybe it's Scrum Masters that are passing kind of that belief along. I don't know who the people are. Only you do. Do that drawing. You'll know who they are. I also figured out something else that's really, really simple. The people I generally don't want to talk to are the people I most need to talk to. Stinks like that, doesn't it? Yeah. So anyways, so this is part of how you crack the case. It's figuring out like who the people are and what the problems are. And I'm not going to read a mind map to you. It's in there. But I just didn't want a slide deck with like pretty quotes, book references, and have a good day, right? So we went from you've got a hairy thing to you should come up with a plan. You have to talk to the people you don't want to talk to, and I'm done, right? Lovely. Thanks so much. That was so helpful. So I came up with another problem too. Imagine you need to hire a new tester and you just keep hearing no. What you really have to find out is what's going on. Who do you really need to talk to? Not always that obvious. And a lot of times what I do is I work problems in what would seem like completely opposite ways. So much so I often don't look like I'm working on a problem. Right? So what I'll do, I'll hang around with product managers and I'll talk to them on a rather continual basis, slowly of course, slowly, about the things they're worried about what will happen if a feature's not implemented well, it's not built well, it could go wrong, right? Backfires. And I get them anxious. And the only thing they can really do with that anxiety is hope that we test it well. So rather than getting them convinced that testing is helpful, I get them to realize testing is helpful, right? So don't overtly market yourself, right? Because you'll hear that. You have to prove your value. Of course you have to prove your value because you shouldn't be there if you can't, right? You should not be there if you can't. But it doesn't mean that you're always doing it from the pulpit in the most obvious ways. Sometimes it's in other ways, right? And sometimes it's by inviting people to things. A lot of times people feel very locked out of testing. We all know they're bored out of it or not interested, and that stinks, but it's true. Invite them to things. Hey, we're having an automation discussion on Friday trying to figure out what the heck to do with the backlog. Do you want to come listen to us? We'd love your input. At least then you'll understand the things that we have in the backlog, right? And what happens if you keep inviting people to things, they no longer can be like, well, I have no idea what they're doing. They don't dare say that because they've been invited. And you invite them, of course, at a moment when some other people might happen to be in the room, right? So everyone knows they've been invited, right? I know it's a little sleazy, right? But so aren't their hairballs, right? Sometimes the only way you get a hairball out of the drain is to like power it with Drano and like have at it, right? So you work the problem sometimes in ways that don't seem that obvious, because if you do the obvious, sometimes those things don't really work. And you figure out who those allies are in that combination. It's really like a jigsaw puzzle. When you really get into it, actually solving problems is pretty fun. And you look at other things and you realize like they're not even as interesting. And the beauty of the problems is like they're always different. I'm always solving a different problem and it's always a different cast of people. And so I can't, and I don't. And that maybe that's a funny thing about consultants. When you work at a place for a long time, you can often, what's the word I want? Generalize. Because you're thinking in your head about a domain that you know, and maybe at your place, maybe all the developers are difficult. Maybe they are. And so it's easy to make that comment. When you're a consultant like me, and I don't even know how many places I've been, like I'd have to sit and count, right? It's always a different cast of characters. And they don't wear black and white shirts. So I can't always figure it out. And of course, lots of gray in between too. So part of it is figuring out who those people are. Okay, I have a summary because, did you know this? Speakers are supposed to have a summary. So there you go. But it's a very boring summary, right? Instead, I'd rather go back to this, which is, she's a little less depressed now, right? Because that's the other thing, by the way, speakers are supposed to do. You introduce a problem, I've told you how to solve the problem, and then the problem's gone, right? It's kind of like, what's that show, like Law and Order, right? So like within 45 minutes, we have got to figure out who the culprit is, wrap this up nicely, get to an ad break, and be on time. Except I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to show you my closing slide, but I'm not leaving yet, so don't toss me out yet. I would like to ask if people have questions, because sometimes this is when it gets really fun, and I'm good with questions. Oh my gosh, have we not been doing this all day? Like silence for 3 minutes, then someone kind of thinks of one, then 2 or 3 other people have them. Oh, and I can even forecast the other. I'm such a cynic. Some people won't raise their hands at all, but the second the mic goes off, they'll come up here and talk to me. They will. And you know what? Whatever those conversations are, everyone else in here wants to hear them. So here's an opportunity to not be shy, because they're going to give you a mic, but you won't be on the camera. And like, give me your gnarliest. Let's have at it.
So earlier you mentioned that that you need to be ready to deal with problems, but if you find it really tough to be in those problems, like someone's really vicious or the conflict really drains you? How do you prepare better for being able to deal with those problems?
I have come to a conclusion, years of college and work, that there are some really miserable people in this world, and they go to work every day, and they make other people miserable. And that for some people, either something really bad has happened to them, and I get it, I've had some bad things happen to me, and they haven't gotten over them. And they're miserable. There are miserable people, and they come to work, and it seems like they just love making other people unhappy. And being around them is a real drain. And so a lot of times what I'll do with those people is I try to figure out, what is it that they know? What is it that I could learn from them? And sometimes the only thing you learn is what you don't want to be. But you're learning something. You are learning something. And if they're in a position of some influence or title or power, and it's any combination of those, you've got to find a way. You've got to do something with them. You can't ignore them because chances are they're a loose cannon that can hurt you. And so you have to find something. Either you can get along with them at some level, or you have some common beliefs. Worst case, you have none of that, but you know enough to keep your wits about you when you're near them. And you work it the best you can. And I hope they're not your boss. Although I saw something on LinkedIn or somewhere the other day that your boss doesn't have to like you. Of course they don't have to like you. This has never been about liking each other. It's about being able to work together, which may or may not involve liking each other, right? That's a bonus. Probably didn't help you a lot, right? So you got to stare at the hairball and figure out if you can do something with it or not.
You didn't attack it directly, but you got there. Yeah, thank you.
Come in from the side.
Sounds like that would be a good time to have allies.
And sometimes allies are subject matter. Like I've realized in some situations that get heated, because maybe the person tends to get heated, make it about the thing and not about the people. So a lot of times one of the best ways to reduce pressure, if you're in a meeting that's really hard, don't feel like it's about you, right? So it's about, we're going to look at this together, right? So now we're looking at that. We're not looking at me. It's my clock. It keeps me on time. We're focused on that. It kind of brings it away from the people. And so for some people who feel like they're being attacked, especially developers and like number of unit tests or code coverage or situations, make it be about that. Reduce the stress for other people. You know what happens when you reduce it for other people? They'll be nicer to you, right? Right? So like maybe you can get a good thing started as opposed to like a kind of a toxic thing started. Question?
So what are some of the things you've done when you've encountered problems where it's just excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse about why something is a certain way?
Would that be somebody that I hired? Because that wouldn't happen.
No. Just like in some of your consulting roles, have you come across where it's just like, oh, this, and then this, and then this, and then you're trying to eliminate the excuses from people, and it's...
I can think of one. Let's
Yeah.
try this for a story. So I had a client, and if they're watching, and they might be, and that happens when you consult, right? Like they keep an eye on you because they're afraid you're going to talk about them. But thankfully, this was a place that I loved working, and they did something brilliant with me. They said, solve problems. And so I ended up working with 27 different teams in the course of a year and had a blast. It was fantastic. But I was on one team that had 2 remote testers in an embedded Agile team, and they were very not engaged. And they were remote, and we'd get the video up, and they'd, honestly, I don't know what they were doing, even on the video. And it was really maddening. I couldn't do anything with them, you know, and they weren't even nearby, so I couldn't do any MIPITs, and I couldn't spend any time with them, and like, it was tough. So every now and then I'll act dumber than I am, which is, I'm pretty good at doing that. And so we had one of those big plasma screens with the video going, like bigger than, probably bigger than me kind of thing. And I walked all the way up to the video, so out of this circle, right, for the stand-up meeting, which sometimes I'm a nightmare in a stand-up meeting. I'm better to visit a team, but not always at stand-up. And I walked pretty darn close to the video, and I went, and I kind of tapped on it a little bit, and I'm like, is this thing frozen, or are you guys actually there? Because they were just not engaged. So then they started twitching and feeling really uncomfortable because somebody was really calling them on it. And I kind of just kept in that direction, right? So maybe we should talk after the stand-up. I can't really hear you guys. Maybe it's a bad connection. Maybe we should, and just kind of just keep going at it, you know? The other situation that I see is and there's a lot of names for it. I hadn't heard the WAGL. I'm used to Scrumafall, where you're working on a 2-week sprint and they're doing all the development, and then the Wednesday before the Friday that it's supposed to be done, the tester gets all the stuff and they're testing like crazy. So it's like waterfall, but condensed. And the excuse is the build isn't really ready. I don't really have anything yet. The feature's not really baked. But I know it doesn't work, so I don't really see why I'd give it to you, because like I already know it doesn't work, and so why should you look at it? And those are actually not that hard to work at. So you've got to convince them, oh, I know the feature doesn't work. I get that. I know that. You just started working on it like a day ago. But if I spend time with it now when it's broken, I'll really be able to go so much faster when it's working well. And so really, you're just giving me a chance to learn. And I'm sure that you wouldn't want to take that from me. So, see it, right? Yeah, you just see it. And you ask that in front of a couple of other people, right? And now what's happened is instead of you being the jerk who's nagging and whining, right? Yeah, you work it. You just have to kind of work it. And there can be honest and like good reasons behind it. Like they're really uncomfortable having somebody see something half-baked. I had a developer once who was so slow about giving it to me, and I made a deal with him, like, I will not enter a single JIRA, and I won't do one of those spreadsheets, and there won't be an email. Just totally want to look at it. And I don't know what he'd been bit by before, a number of bugs against his code or something like that, so he really didn't want me to see it. And I lived to that, right? And I cracked my own deal with them. No games in front of anyone or anything. Like, I just kind of cracked the deal. So try to figure out like what the block is. There's usually a block, and you get a little bit more ahead with the problem if you can figure out what the emotion is. Albert had a wonderful quote. What is it? Blame is fear hiding? That was cool. Blame hides fear. Blame hides fear. Blame tries to hide fear. It doesn't always. But so if you can find the emotion behind it, then what you can do is you can work in a way, in a nice way, not to be a hairball, not to be a nasty situation, but to work it in a good way, the best you can. Everyone else is working somewhere awesome. I want the list.
So as you mentioned, some hairballs are really huge. Is there a way to recognize success in just making it a slightly smaller hairball versus completely clearing the drain? And if so, how do you recognize that? I think for me, if I'm trying to work on a big one, I might still see only a small reduction as a failure, but it may not be, right?
Yeah, you have to give yourself a break along the way. You know, something else that took a lot of years. No one will give you a break. Don't look to other people to give it to you, because they won't. And especially if it's at all political, nobody will reward you in any way for having slightly reduced some of the tension or some of the weirdness going on, because no one wants to talk about the weirdness. It doesn't exist. That's your delusional problem, right? So how could somebody else reward you for it? So you have to give yourself credit. And I guess you just do it in small ways. It's kind of like discipline, small ways, right? So if I, in the olden days, if I used to make it through my little MIPIT list, I just felt really good for myself. Like I was able to do it. I was able to approach that really difficult developer. I was able to do this and feel good. And sometimes retreat a little bit, right? Like nobody needs to be whapped at constantly. Even problems, if you chip at them every day, at some point people will figure it out and they'll be like, what is with her lately on this whole automation thing? And And it can change it sometimes in a way you don't want it to change. So, like, recognize it for yourself. You know, if it's a matter of, I try to do like really small things for myself, and my preferences when they don't cost money, and now the new thing is they don't cost calories, right? To reward myself. So if I've been going through something that's really hard or a difficult time, I'll say to myself in the morning, it's a long-standing habit, 3 nice things. So I'll say to myself, what are 3 nice things I can do for myself today? And they're usually really small, like nobody would even notice them. Like today, I'm going to buy that really expensive Starbucks drink and just enjoy it, right? All right, so it costs money. It might have some calories on that one. Or it might just be, you know, I'm going to skinny out of here on the early side, right? Or I'm going to have lunch alone and like buy myself like a nice, okay, money and calories. But I'll work in it. You know, like I'll take a break and I'll say to myself, like, take the time to take a walk. I've been really struggling with working out during the day because I get called into meetings at weird times and it like blows my whole ability to work out. So I've been walking a lot early morning because it's not freezing to tears yet in Chicago. So I get up and I go walking, and I see that as a treat. And I always feel so much better after it. So you have to find ways to sort of reward yourself, you know. And recognize your small wins, especially on some of these, because nobody will do it. So. The problems are starting to crop up.
You mentioned that you are or used to be INTJ, and lots of them are in testing. Certainly you don't look like one, at least now. So I don't think, though, it's gone. So any ideas or advice on building layers on top? So you can be ISTP if you need to be, or,
Yeah.
you know.
Huh. Yeah, I am an INTJ still at my heart. I'm still an introvert. I still definitely regain energy by being alone. It's all learned behaviors. So, truthful story, the way it really played out. Here goes the years. 1997, I think I went to my first software testing conference, and I met this guy on break out in the hall. He was just nice to me. I was a really green kid, first conference. His name happened to be Kem Kaner. Yeah, I lucked out on that. He was really nice to me, invited me to a peer workshop and just spent time with me. And then I met James Bach, was one of the second persons that I met, and James was like, you have some good stories, you should speak. And I was like, no. Maybe write an article, I'm not speaking. He was like, no, you should. You should speak. I was like, why? Why would I do that? He was like, it'd be good for you. I was like, I don't think so, right? So I did it because James really encouraged me in the beginning. And for a while I had this thing with him that if he was at the same conference, he would come and watch me speak, and he would debrief with me after about what I was good at and what I wasn't. And because he's watched me speak a bunch of times, he now can say things like, well, that time in Sweden, and he can, and it's all in his memory, you know, because big brain, right? So what happened was a number of years after I started speaking, when I went into consulting, weird things would happen to me, like, hey, can you come join this meeting and come explain this blah, blah, blah in testing? No notice. Sure. But it wasn't so bad, because I had just spoken maybe somewhere in front of 50 people. And so sit around a table with like 10 or 12, and it was easier than that. I mean, it's a different format. You have to behave a little bit differently, but it got easier. And then I started noticing that the more I spoke, the easier it made my consulting. And they have this weird symbiotic relationship, right, where people will see me speak and they'll be like, we could use some of that here. Come work for us. And then I would say 9 out of 10 of my clients check me out on LinkedIn, my website, which by the way is KarenJohnsonKeynoteTQ2016. Fit that in. Or on Twitter. I had one client who told me, well, I checked for 2 things. 1, the things that you've done, and 2, the things that you don't talk about, because I want to make sure you don't talk about our stuff. It all feeds together. It all feeds together. So it's all learned behaviors. All learned. And they all help me. Like the stuff I do, the extracurricular, like coming to a conference, helps with the daytime stuff. You know, but it took years. Honestly, it took years of speaking before it helped me during the day. for a while, I'm beating my head into the wall. I'm not sure why. Well, I guess one of the things I loved is the people I've met. So I've been this long believer in the testing community, right? I know people are literally around the globe. I know people who will help me if I reach out to them with a testing question. I'm staring at some of them because I know they will. And it's true. There's a tremendous community here. And when I first came into the testing community, I didn't know anyone. I was the lone tester at my company. I didn't know testing was a profession. I didn't know there were other people out there. And over the years of going through some rough stuff, like this community was a community that was there for me. So a lot of times now I feel much like I want to give back to the community. So I'm often now looking for people I can mentor and like kind of pass it on to, because I probably won't be able to do this forever, right? So, yeah. You know, the other thing that happens is people will come and they'll say to me, I want to be a consultant. I want to start writing articles. And I'll say to them, like, well, do you like to write? And they'll say, no. So why are you writing articles? Well, because I think I should. Okay. I get the pushing yourself thing. Do you want to? No, I just think I should have a website where I have spoken in places and I have written articles, and then people will hire me. First of all, it doesn't work that way. Most people don't hire me because I do this. They check it that I have because they've heard about it, but I don't get hired because of this. So don't do things that are completely unnatural or things that you don't want to do. I had enough bones in me that wanted to be able to, even though it's hard. If you don't have any of those bones in you, don't do it to yourself. Like, you know? I sense that you want to do more than you've been doing. So you should push yourself, right? But it's a balancing act. And I'm still the INTJ, right? Definitely judgmental. Got that down. And, you know, the introvert, there's going to be a point late tonight that I'll be laying in bed playing on Pinterest, and I'll be happy. Yeah. That help you? See, that's the problem too, right? You put people in a room like this, you ask, did it help, and they have to say yes. I get that. So if it didn't, you know how to track me down. Track me down and be like, that didn't really do it.
Well, I got that having some person to give you a push or having a mentor is a big start.
It's a big start.
It's about introvert versus extrovert. I would say one of the things I noticed challenge transitioning between J to P and backwards, you know, judging and perceiving. So again, I used to have 90% on J. Like, you know, if I don't have a decision about something, I'm very anxious until I read some Jerry's books, and like you can decide to decide later. So it satisfies, but basically it flips you to the P side.
You know, sometimes we end up admiring people who have skills that we don't have, and we don't have to attain them, but it's okay to keep admiring them. If that helps. And if it doesn't, track me down. All right, Stacy. Okay.
Yeah, hi. Just a question. You had mentioned don't take action when you're heavy with emotion. What if the problem is festering and festering, and the problem arises in front of you, you're dealing with it, and emotion does come in? What tips can you give to, like...
Yeah, right. Right, like Hillary last night, right? Because he just kept like kind of pinging at her. It was like so silly. But we knew he would do that, right? You know, you're going to like know yourself, right? Work on your breathing. Look for excuses to slow things down, because speed doesn't help. If things are bad, speed will not help. So like, can you take a bathroom break? It's a little weaselly, but you can take a bathroom break. I am absolutely programmed myself to not cry. I don't care what goes down in an office, you're not going to make me cry. Like, not happening. First of all, I don't even have to work on that. It's just not going to happen. Not unless you get me to talk about my parents, right? And then forget it. It could get a little weird. But, you know, because that's a huge show of cards for people. And that's a thing, right? Like, there's bullies out there, and there are people who love to see you get all gummed up and like you're somebody whose face gets flushed, or, you know, whatever you do. if you can tone down on any of the physical manifestations, and you could tell Hillary was doing that last night, right? Like, gosh, this guy is such a jerk, totally dealing with it. Yep, not gonna lose it. Whatever it takes, right? Whatever it takes. So there's some self-talk going on. There's a lot of monitoring of yourself. The other thing that you can do when you're really heated, speaking, talk as slow as you can physically stand to. When I used to get more nervous than I do now speaking, I would get up here and talk really, really fast. And I grew up in Boston, so it was really kind of crazy. And the more nervous I got, the faster I went. And I had to say to myself, go really slow, even in your head if it feels slow. There's a thing I like in speaking on cadence, and people don't talk about this. I'm going to tangent, and I warned you guys, like, she digresses. I really like when speakers talk at a certain speed. I like to be able to think when they're speaking. Lee Copeland is fantastic at this. Listen to his podcast. He talks at this speed where you're not an idiot, but he's talking at a speed that you can digest what he's saying, actually think about it, you might be able to retain it, you could incorporate it. That speed really matters. If somebody goes fast, they don't catch all of it. So if you get really emotional and you talk really fast, first of all, other people won't retain it, and all it will do is internally get that heart rate up where you're going really fast, you're clocking. And there are days I can feel that when I get really stressed about something, and when it's done, I'll realize, like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. Like, that just wore me out, and I didn't realize it. What's fun is getting to a place in speaking where speaking now energizes me, and it used to deplete me. Never expected that to happen, right? Show-off consultant. What did Keith say? Smarty pants. Yeah, she likes it too much, right? You get almost used to it. Slow it down. Slow it down. Hide those things physically that you can hide. Know those people who are going to do that to you. Compartmentalize, something I used to hate doing, right? When my parents were first really ill, I was just fragged out every day. But I had to work really hard at compartmentalizing. I have massive problems over here, but right now I'm here. And I have this client, and they're paying me. This is their hour. And I've gotten pretty good at being able to, like, drop the walls down. True story, first live webinar I ever did, 5 minutes before I started, my sister called me up to let me know that one of my great nieces had just almost died from SIDS. What am I supposed to do with this phone call? Right? And then she's off the phone, she's gone, she's in the hospital. And I got this webinar starting, right? And the editor gets on and says, how you doing? I'm like, great. Doing good. So to be able to compartmentalize on the fly like that, that's powerful. It took me years to do it, and it made me finally realize it doesn't mean you don't care about the other problems. You may massively care about them. In fact, more than what you're currently doing, you're just not thinking about it right now. You're doing one thing. Hyper-focus. Any of those help? Yeah. Think you can do any of those? Yeah? Try the MIPIT thing maybe in your pocket? All right. 5:04, and I think there's beer downstairs. This is probably our end, right? Thank you for coming.